What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video, and if you're new here, welcome. And this one is Reddit stories that are unexplained or unsettling or just scary. Whether you think Reddit stories are cool or not, it's definitely worth it listening to these stories because they are so scary and just worth the listen. So welcome. Sit back, relax, subscribe to the channel. So yeah, let's get into this first story. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed anything weird behavior or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea, and that's fine, but that's what's so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it does not run in her family. I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I would have seen some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself coffee before work. I was running a bit late that morning and knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door, when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. I could only see her eyes and a strand of her long, dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the shit out of my lips though. "Geez, Lynn," I said, wiping a few drops of my coffee from my pants. "You scared the shit out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurrying off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird, and just totally out of character for her, like I said. But I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of OJ in my hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with her wide, unblinking eyes and grinning like a Cheshire cat. I screamed, I'll admit it, not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason, at that moment, I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all floors. I didn't run after her or even yell at her. I just stood there frozen in shock, wondering what had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she was really asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again. From over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me out sometimes, you know that?" I said. She giggled and set her coffee on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sounds her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth she was doing this. She didn't answer, but she had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was maybe done with her weird pranks, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have just given up on her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking, and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy, but after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax a little bit. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was maybe just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m. I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain, her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long, dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with this crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen for any sound. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. What the fuck fuck, Lynn," I snapped. "This shit is getting crazy fucking annoying." I waited for her to apologize or to call me a jerk, but instead I heard a faint moan. So quiet, I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. "Lynn?" I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. "I swear to God, just stop it," I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before, but there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was so scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which felt like a lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom. So, I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thank God it didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked over for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers, and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closest door as if in slow motion, and locked eyes with my wife, who's peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream, I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver down my entire body. Somehow I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't even hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold, maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was so damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed to. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what had happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill, so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she wouldn't do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while. Possibly all night long. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear at that moment. I jumped from my couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell's wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. "Now." She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs, as if Lynn could hear them from her place outside. Her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her, give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife, such as, "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home," and more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was. Not a damn one addressing the crazy shit she pulled on me. Like she hadn't just been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from the situation, but if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully, I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I didn't want to pry because it's not my place. "But is this fight something that can be mended?" Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. "I don't know, she's like a different person," I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, man, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. "Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed," she said, ever the peacemaker. "I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her," I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife, but how could I live with something like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. "Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed," she said. "I don't know about that," I said. "Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know," Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread warming its way through my skin. "Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually, as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. "She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work," she said, cleaning the plates from the table. "I didn't see her car though. Maybe she took an Uber or something." "Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside?" I asked. Sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. "No, she just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no, just to let you sleep," she said as she washed the dishes. "That's all? She didn't say anything else?" I asked. "No, she looked awful though, like she hadn't slept in days. I really think you should call her." I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly, she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believe she was, I had to try and get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was just being creepy? As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Not yet, anyway. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting, but this wasn't just some prank. It felt wrong. Dangerous even, like something sinister lurked behind her smile. I knew as her husband, I was well within my rights to have her committed, but what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed, so I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I were never on the best of terms. We never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were for just super short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away, so we didn't have to see her that often. I was happy to avoid this woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to do. "Yes," she answered, already sounding irritated. "Marianne, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk?" I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. "I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment. What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin?" she said coolly. "It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something." I was quickly interrupted. "It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is this what you want from me?" she asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. "I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues," I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was thinking or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. "I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now, I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind me," she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm seriously concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother, you would be as well. I said, my frustration evident in my voice. If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what you expect of me, she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn, I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she was trying to hold her steely persona together, but failing. Marianne, what's wrong? I started. Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye. I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up, until I remembered her last words to me. Seek professional help. She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no, I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she'd said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else, someone that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly, or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything though. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet, but I told them about our last encounter, how she hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube, Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talk to her, tried to coax her into going willingly was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning just after breakfast. There was no way I was going in at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car was not there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets like he was going on a stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked in the house behind me with his nose all scrunched up. What do you guys use to clean the floors around here? Shh, Chris mumbled. Shut up, I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight in. And if I hadn't left it for just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. Why are you looking under the couch? Chris asked eventually. Aren't we looking for your wife? He was looking at me like I was a moron. Let's just go upstairs, I whispered. He shook his head but followed me upstairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few steps. I noticed that one of Lynn and my wedding portraits that hung on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken the photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom. but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that, so we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something," Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoveled some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and the smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as quarters, while others were as tiny as marbles. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and I shuddered at the thought. "Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction, but your wife's in here collecting eyeballs," Chris said, gagging. "Ben, I think we should go," he called from the hall. "I'm getting nauseous." "All right." I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue and I couldn't help but gag again. "Who the lines up eyeballs in their closet like that?" Chris mumbled. "I tried to tell you she needed help," I said. "She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a exorcist," he said. "You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any..." His words died in his throat, and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why, I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. "Chris," I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making, a sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving to say the least. Wide eyes and the huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Lynn," I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements as if she was nodding. "Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that?" I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some sort of dangerous animal. "I love you, Lynn," I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. "Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding," I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off her was so revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excitement, hiccuping sounds got louder, and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from in between her fingers. "Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding," I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You alright in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him. cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast scooting out from under the bed, the glass shards still in her fist. "Chris, run, go," I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move because a second later, I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Jesus, Lynn," Chris said. You, playing hide and seek?" I reached back and pushed him towards the step. "Move your ass, Chris," I said quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wide and wide so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want to help," I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her, and then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt it reach onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rear view mirror. Sure, I'd see her there, running after us, but I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search, but of course, Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow, I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the past 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her, maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needed, but now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "I found you." And a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm still being watched. This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or 2 of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks. 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl, and they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you were almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees, very few streetlights, and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case. But the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So per the directions, we made a left off the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly this was, stepped over the log, and noticed two narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as my imagination. And in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared, not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What would we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing. And I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large, we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live there, they were long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale, dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the fuck is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked out and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is this? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy shit!" I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling away and closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding, and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states, yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of, "The woods. That really happened, right?" It most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 in the morning, and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. This happened about a month ago, but I couldn't decide if I should post it or not. I'm kind of a paranoid person and didn't know if I was going to deal with something like this again if I should post about it, but since it's been a month and nothing has happened again, I thought I'd share it. I would like to point out that English is not my first language, so please excuse me for any errors in the story. Here it is. I'm a 22-year-old girl from Bulgaria, studying art in another town. I was back home to my parents' house for Christmas vacation, so this happened a little after New Year's. My parents' house is in a little village near a big town, where I grew up. We moved in the village, and we now live in a 2-story house. I was sitting one night in my room, drawing in my sketchbook, and listening to some amazing horror stories on YouTube, as I usually do. It was about 2 o'clock, and I was immersed in a scary story, not knowing that I would be living in my own horror story real soon. It happened with me receiving a notification from Snapchat that someone added me. I was kind of confused, but still opened it and saw that someone with the username Lappy789 added me as a friend. Now, I would like to explain why this was weird to me. I don't use Snapchat anymore. I just have it on my phone for no reason at all. None of my friends use it, since Instagram got the story thing and we all started to use that instead. I have very little friends on Snapchat and none of them use it, so I didn't think that it was somebody I know. And I don't have my location on, or Bitmoji or whatever it's called, that can give away my location and my username to people nearby. I don't know if that's what it does. Like I said, I haven't been using Snapchat in a while. Oh, I also didn't have my username written anywhere on my social media. Moving on. Out of curiosity, I added Lappy789 and opened their profile to see if they had a picture or something that could tell me who this was. There was nothing. Only their Snapchat score, which was about 7. I set my phone on my desk and started to rewind the video to listen to the parts that I missed while I was distracted with the phone. As I was getting ready to go back to sketching, when I got a notification that Lappy789 sent me a snap. I opened it and it was a picture of grass, taken with flashlight. I looked at it, confused, and then went to chat box to type, "What is this? Who are you?" Lappy789 received it, then it said that they read it, and they didn't respond. At this point, I started to ask all of my friends if it was one of them, or if they had given my username to someone, but no one confessed. Next snap came, and it was a picture of what looked like a red tile. I was growing very impatient, and once again, I texted the person, asking who he is and if we know each other. They saw my message and didn't respond. Next snap came, and I was prepared to start screenshotting to show my boyfriend. It was a picture of what it looked like a little knob, but I couldn't see exactly what it was. I felt to screenshot it, so I had to replay the snap. When I screenshotted it, I went to look at my picture and realized that this thing was a little closing mechanism on our backyard gazebo. At this point, I'm slowly realizing that this person is sending me Snapchats from my backyard. And by the way, it's not so easy for someone to come to our backyard, as we have a very tall fence and you have to take your time and scout the place around to find a possible way to climb the fence. And it was dark, so it would be difficult. That to me meant that whoever this was, they'd been looking around during the day to find a way to get in. I stood up from my desk and ran to turn off all the lights. When it was dark, I tried to peek through my window shades to the backyard, but it was a very cloudy and dark night, so I didn't see anything. Next snap came, and like the last, I was ready to screenshot. When I opened the snap, I nearly screamed. It was a picture of the tip of a ceramic abstract sculpture that we have out in our backyard. I ran out of my room, not knowing what to do. For some strange reason, I didn't want to wake up my dad and tell him what was going on. My mom was sleeping downstairs on the couch, and I was upstairs, trying to figure out how to open the super loud and screechy door to our terrace, without waking up my parents and letting that freak know what I was doing. I battled with the door for about 30 seconds, but I managed to open it quietly and carefully stepped outside to look at the backyard. Didn't see anything. I looked and I looked, trying to stay as low as I can, so that the snapper wouldn't see me, but I couldn't see anything. I went inside, once again, trying my best to be as quiet as possible, when I received another Snapchat from Lappy789. It was a picture of my mom, sleeping on the couch, taken from outside through a crack in the blinds. This freak took a fucking photo of my mom. As shocked and terrified I was, I still managed to screenshot it. At this point, I lost it. I started screaming for my dad. He came out of the bedroom and tried to calm me down as I was trying to explain to him that there was somebody in our backyard. I could see that he didn't really take me seriously, but he went outside anyways, carrying his gun. My mom was awake now, trying to calm me down as I was hyperventilating, failing to explain to her what Snapchat was. My dad came inside after checking everywhere and said that he didn't find anybody. I showed them the pictures and they seemed disturbed now, but said that it was probably a kid or one of my friends just trying to mess with us. The thing is that I don't live in the big town that I lived in before we moved to the nearby village. All of my friends live either in my hometown or other towns in the country, and I don't know anyone in the village that I live in now. So the idea that it might have been somebody I know didn't seem right to me. I went in my room when I calmed down and checked my phone, remembering that I didn't look if I had any new snaps after I showed my parents the pictures. I had 3 new snaps from Lappy789. There were a picture of our front gate, which I couldn't screenshot, and 2 messages saying, "See you soon. Bye." I immediately blocked the account. I barely slept that night. I texted and called all of my friends, begging them to confess if one of them did it, but nobody did. When I told what happened to my boyfriend, he asked everyone that he knew, but still, nothing. We tried to find the account, but we soon found out that they had deactivated it. There was no one in the name of Lappy789 anymore. I deleted Snapchat that night and don't think I'll ever use it again. The next day, I went outside to look around and see if the creep left something behind, and I saw footprints on a little muddy patch near the place that they took the photo of my mom. My dad doesn't seem to believe me it was the footprints of the intruder, saying that it was probably one of us stepping there, but I'm pretty sure they weren't ours. To this day, I still don't know who it was. I've asked everyone that I know, but nothing has come up of it. I still wonder what their intentions were. Were they trying to scare me? Were they stalking me? Who were they? How did they find me? How did they enter my backyard? Do they still send me Snapchats? I wouldn't know. I deleted the app. I've been babysitting all summer in order to make some extra cash. At first, I just asked around at school if anyone needed a babysitter for their siblings or if they knew anyone who could be interested. I started babysitting kids whose families I knew, but eventually I needed more money, so I put up an ad on Craigslist. It wasn't long until I got a response. The family lived in the suburbs, but what bothered me was how close to the woods their house was, and the fact that they didn't have any neighbors. I got a bit freaked out at first, considering the fact that they were strangers with a cabin in the woods, but I decided to push through the fear for the money. The house was a cozy little cabin, clean, with a nice garden in the back that had a gate which led to a trail in the woods. They had a little lanterns hung out in the garden and a swing all the way in the back. The living room had a large window that faced directly the forest, and during the day, the room was bathed in sunlight. The kitchen was right next to it, with its counter facing another huge window, surrounded by pots and vines and stupid signs like "Home is where the family is" or "In this house, we say sorry." Upstairs, they only had the 2 bedrooms. The attic was a tiny space whose window faced the woods too. The kid was pretty quiet. Honestly, I neither liked or disliked him. I tried to form some sort of opinion, but he just didn't stand out in any way. He wasn't mean or stubborn, but he wasn't a sweetheart either. He must have been around 5 or 6 years old, so I would just put him to bed quickly and then snoop around the house. I've always been curious about whoever hired me, and I just know it's not exactly recommended, but I would just go through people's stuff whenever I felt bored. It must have been around midnight that night when I slowly pulled out one of the drawers in the maid bedroom. This one had all types of trinkets, coins, notebooks, pins, and buttons. This family liked to collect useless stuff and let it hang around the house, and I liked to explore it. As I was studying this little ceramic statue of a horse, I moved around, noticing the moonlight hit its porcelain from different angles. I debated whether to just take it or not. Would they even notice? My chest tightened and my mouth opened. The horse was no longer bathed in moonlight because this huge shadow had covered it and was dancing on its porcelain. Looking around a bit, I noticed the shadow took up half the room. I could not make out the silhouette or what could have made it. It just seemed so unexpected that fear crept up to me and froze me. Someone was at the window. I knew it could have been a bird. That's the rational explanation, and I could have solved all this doubt by just looking up. But I didn't, because what if it wasn't a bird? I stood still for so long, not knowing what to do, until it passed, and the horse was lit up again by the moonlight. I breathed a sigh of relief and put the horse in my pocket. I didn't know at the time, but that would have been my first contact with it. Something made me stop snooping around and just get downstairs. I turned on the TV and curled up on the couch. At one point during the night, I heard creaking upstairs. I know it shouldn't have freaked me out so bad, but I was still so scared that I went to check it out. The house was dark and quiet, and the 2 bedrooms facing each other were empty. Empty. Where did the kid go? Jason? My voice pierced the silence, and I felt like an intruder, destroying the quiet of the night. Jason, where did you go? I kept having the feeling of being watched, so I turned around, fixated on the attic door, which was now opened. My instincts kept telling me to just leave, but my head, now spinning, refused. What if we had an intruder? What if he'd taken Jason? If I had just looked up at the window when the shadow passed, now I would know what I was dealing with. If I just had the courage to face it. My voice sounded a lot weaker than the first time, but I still had to try. Jason? Yeah. The response was almost immediate and coming from the attic. Odd. What was he doing up there? I put my foot on the first step of the stairs. What are you doing up here? It's really late. Your parents are going to be home soon. Step after step, I tried to readjust my eyes to the darkness. The attic was really dark compared to the rest of the house, and I could make out a ray of light that traced out this tiny silhouette. Jason, are you here? What are you doing? You're freaking me out. I finally reached him and put my hands on his tiny shoulders, but he didn't respond. He was just staring out the tiny window into the woods. What's going on? I asked. What are you looking at? I sat next to him and stared out the window at the woods. There was a portion of grass beginning from the house, pierced by trees. The further you went, the denser the trees are, until you discover you were completely surrounded by the woods. Unable to see the sky from how tight the branches closed around you, the forest commenced from the garden and swallowed the horizon like a dark mass, blending with the sky. The window framed this darkness, this suffocating emptiness. It made me feel as if we'd reached the end of the world, and had we dared to venture into the forest, we'd just fall off the face of the earth. And there stood Jason, just staring. What are you seeing? He just wouldn't answer, so I decided to find out by myself. Studying the scenery, nothing particular stood out. Of course, I just needed to pay more attention. Yeah, the more you looked, the more movement you saw. Birds, animals, even the wind thrilled the branches and the leaves. The grass swaying gently in the wind. And then the shadows were the next thing you noticed. These forever moving stains on the ground. I could have stared out there for years. Maybe that's why Jason wasn't moving. There's just something about the night that keeps you up. What do you think lurks out there? I asked him, playfully. Where in the woods? Yeah, my mom. I blinked a few times. That was unsettling. I mean, kids say weird stuff, but why would he respond to that? Was that a your mom joke? Was he trying to be funny? What do you mean? What does lurk mean? Oh, lurk means, well, when you wait or move slowly in the darkness because you don't want to be seen. So like hiding? Yeah, but you're lurking when you also want to do something bad. Just how animals lurk before they attack. Or monsters, I added, trying to scare him. So what do you think lurks out there in the forest? My mother, he responded once again. My body tensed up. That's not funny. I don't want to be funny. Why would you say that? Your mom, that's an old joke, and it stopped being funny a while ago. I'm not joking. Okay, let's go to sleep. Your mother can't be lurking out there. I saw her and she's pretty nice. I don't know what she told you, but she doesn't eat people. She's out with your dad now, and they're gonna come home in a few hours. If they find out you aren't sleeping, I'll get a lot of for it. Don't tell your parents I said that. Come on, let's get down. I'm telling the truth. What? Is she a vampire? You know something was standing out the window earlier. I didn't really care that much about what I was saying because in my head everything had a logical explanation. Jason, however, widened his gaze. Yeah, that could have been her. Stop. I'm serious. And what does she want from us? Does she want to eat me? We were now in his bedroom and I had tucked him into bed. I had my back to the window, facing the hallway, which had now become way creepier than expected. She doesn't want to eat you. That's so great. I taste horrible anyways. Good night. I tried to stand up and leave, but he grabbed me. Wait, don't go. Look at me. What now? I want to tell you about this dream I had. This dream that woke me up, but you have to pay attention. Okay. So, in my dream, I was in a garden and I was thirsty, and you were there too. And you tried to leave, but there were a lot of bushes around and you got lost, and I found this puppet. I hate it when people tell me about their dreams, but I sat there listening, facing Jason with my back to the window. Not because his story was interesting, not because I liked being there, because while he held me there, his eyes kept darting to the window, and I'd seen the shadow cover his face. Because he'd insisted I looked at him, but in reality, he didn't want me to turn around. So I listened until he abruptly finished his story when moonlight reached his face again. Thank you for the story. It was really interesting. You're welcome. Good night. Night. I spent the next hour in the other bedroom, fidgeting with the little porcelain horse. This kid was a lot braver than I thought. In the silence, I kept trying to make out distinct, unfamiliar sounds, but didn't succeed. The house had fallen asleep, and the night had become uneventful. His parents arrived soon after that. I put the horse in my pocket and went downstairs to greet them. Was he good, Keith? Yeah, the best. Don't worry. I studied both of them, head to toe, their clothes, mannerisms, facial expressions, but mostly the mom. Were you good? Asked the dad, jokingly. I hope so, I responded. They wanted to drive me home, but I insisted on taking my bike. I closed the door behind me, but instead of leaving, I headed to the backyard. I just wanted to see something. Climbing on the fence, I made it on the roof of the porch, right next to the bedroom window, hoping to see some signs of something. Anything. The window was covered in scratches, but nothing gave out what had been there. I stood there for a while. I don't know why. The parents had gone to sleep and Jason was probably asleep in his room too. I studied the garden from that angle, then the woods, as quiet as a mouse, then the room where the parents were sleeping. After that, I don't remember how I got home. I don't even think I took my bike. I just ran frantically until my legs bled. I didn't even scream. I didn't look around or stop. Just ran until I reached my house and banged on the door. My mother answered, annoyed, and I ran past her, right to my bedroom, covered myself in a blanket, and started typing this. Because while I was watching the parents, something had caught my eye. In the hallway, what I thought to be a coat hanger moved all of a sudden. It had been standing there so still. I hadn't even bothered to notice it, until it disappeared out of my range, then appeared again. This bony, twisted silhouette dragged itself into the bedroom and stood right next to the mother, who was sleeping. It looked uncanny, like a human who'd starved to death, with wide eyes and arms so long they trailed behind it when it walked out. It just stood there watching the parents, then lifted a bony finger and started counting. I stood there, frozen, watching this horrifying show, forever scarred in my head. It kept counting and counting and counting. I was so scared to move that I would have watched it forever. It wasn't until something else happened that made me break into this exhausting run. It saw me. This story occurred a few years back. I would have been around 8 or 9 at the time. My old bedroom sat facing out towards the street, and also happened to be right next to our front door. It was very small, as it had been built in place of our old front porch. The roof was slanted slightly downward toward the window, which took up most of the wall, and the bed could only fit in one way. It was painted purple, not a nice purple either, like a kid's bedroom of course. My bed sat facing towards the door to my bedroom, parallel to the window. A closet took up part of the corner between my bedroom door and the window, making for an unusual space. Every night, I checked to make sure the curtains were shut all the way, as the idea of people watching from the street made me very uncomfortable, even at a young age where things like that shouldn't even cross my mind. Every night I slept soundly. No nightmares, no sudden noises waking me in the middle of the night. Nothing. That was until the middle of the year, during a school break. I remember waking to the sound of someone breathing. I couldn't move, couldn't catch my own breath. I was just stuck. I remember so clearly seeing a man stood in the corner of my room, stuck partially behind the curtain as if it would hide him. Of course, I could see him. He was just a dark entity who stood and watched. After what felt like hours, I was able to get back to sleep. In the morning, I told my mom about what had happened and she explained it was just a strange nightmare and that I was fine. But the way she said it wasn't very believable. These cases of sleep paralysis went on for about a year, taking me up to the middle of the next year, when I was likely 8 or 9. I remember waking in the middle of the night, just like I had most nights for the last year, to the man in the corner. Only this time, I could move. I stayed absolutely still, despite now knowing he was actually there. I could hear his faint breathing, like he was trying to hide from me as much as I was trying to hide from him. I couldn't help but think, has this man been here every night this year? I remembered the thoughts I had. How I'd run out of the room and scream for my mom, how she'd call the police, how this man would be arrested and sent away, but I couldn't do that. He was basically in front of the door. I spent the night staring at him, trying to fall asleep. I'd say it was around 5 a.m. I was able to drift off, just sort of as the birds started to wake. I woke up and lo and behold, he was gone. The first thing I did was tell my mom. She already looked uneasy, like she already knew. That's when I heard 2 people talking outside. I found out later the people outside were my neighbor and a police officer who was taking an eyewitness statement. Around 6 in the morning, our neighbor spotted a man standing outside my window. She called the police, but he was gone before they arrived. Other neighbors stepped forward, saying they'd seen him outside in the middle of the day, looking at our house. There were no signs of a forced entry, only 2 footprints in the flower bed outside my window. My mother told the officers my account of what happened, and they came to the conclusion that he'd done the same thing last year. I saw it, and it sparked my tangent of sleep paralysis. The streetlight outside projected his shadow, so it appeared as though he stood in my room. This whole time, he'd been waiting patiently outside my room. Who knows what would have happened if my neighbor didn't spot him on her way out for work. Just a few minutes, and she could have missed him entirely. I'm freaking out right now. I can barely type. My hands are shaking, pale. I work at home and mostly at night. My neighborhood is noisy during the day, so I usually sleep with a very loud fan on and with my earbuds in, so I wouldn't likely know if something strange was going on during the day. At night, I listen to music via headphones while I work. I don't hear much these days. I moved into my duplex 5 months ago, and the neighbors on the other side of my bedroom wall were always yelling at each other, throwing things, playing bass music, and just being generally horrible. It got to the point where I moved out of my bedroom and into the living room, but I could still hear them. I got used to banging on the walls and all sorts of racket, and started using my fan and earbuds all the time. I always attributed noise from above to the hoodlum kids next door. The duplex is poorly built, and units are not at all isolated from one another, so if they slammed their front door, I could feel it in my bathroom floor, even though they are far apart. The neighbors from hell got evicted for some unknown reason and have been gone for a couple of months. I finally had some peace. But occasionally, I would hear bangs in the ceiling. I would take out an earbud and turn off the fan, and there would be nothing. I have new neighbors now, but they are very quiet. Still, even when their place is empty, I hear these bangs every once in a while. I moved back into my bedroom a couple of weeks ago and heard the sounds more frequently. Eventually, I decided to investigate. There's a sort of loft in my garage, and we do get raccoons around here. One day I climbed up there with a flashlight. To my surprise, the loft isn't limited to the attached garage. This little room extends all the way back over my place, but it is divided from the attic on the other side of the duplex by a plywood barrier. Looking back in there, I didn't see anything unusual. It is an A-frame type room with plywood panels coming out of the sides, leaving only a small pathway to crawl through. So basically, someone or something could hide behind any of these panels and be invisible to anyone looking down this little hallway. I actually saw very little of the attic, but I convinced myself to be satisfied because I was scared to go back there. Not so much of the boogeyman, but because I didn't want to step on a rusty nail or get bitten by something. Anyway, tonight there was a loud bang. I took out my earbuds and turned off the fan. Then, more loud bangs. After that, I clearly heard human footsteps clomping over my head, running towards the garage. Holy shit, every hair on my body stood up and I grabbed my hammer and went towards the laundry room door, which leads into the garage. I stood there for a minute, ready to bash someone's brains in or possibly get mine blown out. Standing terrified by the closed door between the laundry room and the garage, holding my breath, I heard a loud crash. Then the back door of the garage, which leads into my backyard, was flung open and slammed against the other side of the wall. That was not only 10 inches away from me. Holy shit. I heard the jangling of my chicken wire fence and knew the perpetrator was gone. It still took me 5 minutes to enter that garage, and when I did, holy shit. I don't know what spooked the person, but they dumped or knocked an entire survival kit from the attic to my garage floor. There was what looks like a dog bed, a plastic bag filled with cotton, makeshift pillow maybe, empty boxes for canned dog food, one slipper, lots of papers and pieces of plastic, some kind of wooden rack, and a plastic tub filled with cigarette butts and some liquid. Thankfully, only a few smokes spilled onto the concrete. Could be piss in there for all I know. I'm afraid to look in the attic to see what else might be up there. I'm waiting for the cops right now. Here is the attic in my garage, which can only be accessed merely by jumping, grabbing a 2x4, and pulling oneself up. I should have taken a picture of where it leads over my place, but I'm not going to do it right now. I've been listening to this person for the last 5 months, and they have been listening to me. Holy shit. I guess I need to post an update. Cops came and had me write down a quick history in the events of tonight while they looked around the garage and backyard. They didn't climb into the attic. They didn't take any of the stuff either. I thought they would want it for prints or DNA as evidence, but I guess that was naive. They were here for less than 20 minutes. Said they would patrol the neighborhood, told me to keep my doors locked and call if anything else happens. Call 911 if he shows up. Said it happens more often than I want to know. That's it? Yep, lots of sleepless hours ahead. So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years. And to her credit, I've never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind and probably always will. Makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about early 80s I believe, was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real, kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know? And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So, driving into the city, about a 2-hour or so drive out from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me that he was really polite, if not a bit shy. When he asked for a lift into the city, Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc., happy small talk. She felt that they were getting on really well, and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they had talked about was money and how he was pretty dang strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her someday and catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with the warm feeling of a good deed done. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me the next part. How a week later she got a phone call from her driving buddy. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice. Because when he first got in her car, he was planning on R-wording and murdering her once they got to the pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and treated him to a dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. And to please, Nikki, please, never, ever pick up another hitchhiker. Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got a payphone. And so, Mr. Hitchhiker, I know I'm never going to meet you because I'm going to listen to the advice you gave your driving buddy and never, ever pick up a hitchhiker. I've posted this one a couple times before, but seems fairly relevant. A personal experience that I had a while back. Still kind of messes with my head when I reread it. I'll be the first to say that all this stuff could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty chirpy tricks on you. Sorry for the length. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me that in life, you should not be scared of ghosts. Fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed S-word and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with a realtor and lawyer. So, for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer, it was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog and headed up in my dad's car, that he had willed to me, to the cabin. Now, this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but felt the need to mention it anyway. The first 2 days at the cabin were normal, nothing out of the unusual happened. Spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding in the evenings playing PlayStation or just listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. Had already stocked up on food, cigarettes and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut inside from the occasional out to hit the slopes, with my dog as company and DVDs/PlayStation as entertainment. I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. Bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along with small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he had also since passed, playing games and watching DVDs. That day, it was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us were mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Tall. This is important later on. Both these cabins were empty and from the past couple of days I knew that no one was currently staying there. Gave enough background and I'm going to jump to the weirdness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The prints led away from my cabin and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. Disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around and decided to head to bed. My dog, Midnight, was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to the standstill listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kinda freaked out and could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Shit, well, fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of our house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted to, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright. Maybe there are forest animals out there that he wants to chase down, but fuck this. Did not want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from the tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself, so I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. Fuck it, right? As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird, must have been all in my head? What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. By the way, I am shaking right now and my heart is beating hard as I'm typing this next bit. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It was squatted on one branch and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it. Fuck me, what the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing and stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to the bed. But later on in the night, I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not to do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was, passed out eventually, and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit that it could have been all in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time, so I was pretty fucked up from all the drama. Edit. Getting more replies on this one again. So, to answer some questions. 1. Yes, was scared as shit when it happened, and the stuff I did may seem kind of ballsy, but the reality was that I was not really thinking everything through when I went out into the patio to investigate. More impulse, if anything else. 2. I did stay the whole week after that night. The reason being because I really had nowhere else to go. My mother had sold her house and was staying with family while the sale of her new house was going through. Her family was one I did not get along with. I could not go to my dad's side of the family because they partially blamed me for his death. And at the time, I did not feel like being consoled by friends. 3. My dog Midnight never acted weird like that before. But again, he could have been feeding off my anxiousness. 4. The cabin was sold soon after and I never spoke with the buyers. It was all done through a realtor. I have not been back to the area or Oregon since it happened. 5. Yes, I have had some other weird experiences since that time, but nothing as sketchy or frightening as that night. 6. And yes, the incident still scares me. I actually sleep with night lights around the house and have flashlights placed in each room along with other items in case something happens or the lights go out. 7. Oh, and thank you about the condolences about my father. It happened a while back. Still feels fresh in my mind though. About 4 months ago, I began to hear strange things from friends around my neighborhood. For context, I am 17 and live in a nice and expensive neighborhood with my mother and sister. Around 5 every day, I would take my dog out to a nearby park where there would be around 5 to 10 people there with their dogs every day at the same time. I would have casual conversation with the occasional political argument, but for the most part, it was all very casual and relaxed. One day I arrived at the park with my dog, who was eager to play. I walked in and said hello. I knew almost everyone there and had memorized all the names of their dogs. I walk into a conversation about strange occurrences that have been happening around the neighborhood. I hear firsthand accounts of strange and terrifying things that have been happening in people's backyards. I hear about someone who swears they say someone run through their backyard in the middle of the night. I hear someone say they walked out to their backyard to find a dead squirrel and human shit. I also hear about one guy who says he walked out with his dog into his backyard at night only for his dog to start frantically barking and cowering for no apparent reason. All these people live around 30 seconds away from me, so naturally I was interested and quite worried. I get home that day and talk to my mother about all this, and she tells me how she has been seeing many sketchy people around lately. At the time, I had been given lots of homework from school, so I ignored it, hoping nothing would happen to us. A few weeks later, I am on Christmas break and have 2 weeks off school. I'm sleeping at 4 a.m. every day and playing a lot of video games. One night, I hear my phone vibrating. I got to check it and see that it is my sister. I answer to hear her frantically telling me to come downstairs. I get up from my desk and run downstairs to see if everything is okay. As soon as I get down, I see both my cats and my dog staring out into my backyard and my sister standing back in fear. I run up to her and ask if everything is okay, knowing something is clearly wrong. She tells me in a vivid detail how she was doing work on her laptop when she sees our dog get up and bark at the window. She says that when she looked out, she saw a tall figure staring directly into the house. I immediately ran and grabbed a baseball bat and ran back to the window. For the next 30 minutes, my sister and I stared out into the pitch black in complete silence. As I clenched the bat, I thought about what could have happened. Could have been nothing? Could have just been an animal that my sister thought was a person? Because I never saw anything, I could not tell you. All I know is that the look on my sister's and my pet's faces meant something was out there. I've always been good friends with my one cousin, Cole, who's the same age I am. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well together, and were often found together, both in school, as we'd always wound up in the same class together throughout elementary school, and outside of it. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday afternoon around the later part of May, and we were psyched at the start of the weekend. We'd wound up at his house since he didn't live too far away from me, and at one point, my mom called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was being kept at the hospital overnight for observation, and both my parents and Cole's were planning on staying with him and grandma at the hospital, since my mom and her sister were the two of their siblings who lived close by. I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother Hunter being in charge while our parents were out. This was fine by us. I got along well enough with Hunter, and he was never that bossy older brother or cousin that some of my other friends said they had to put up with. We ordered out for pizza, and enjoying goofing off as boys that age tend to do. At around 9 or so, there was a knock at the front of the door, and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious as to who it could be at this time of night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said that they were from the city and that they were investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and when Cole said they were unavailable at the moment, which we were told to save strangers if our parents weren't home, the guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house and if they could come inside to check. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine and perhaps they should move on to check on other homes in our neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave, but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that and went back to goofing off. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I'd sleep in there with them, rather than me hitting the sack on the couch or something like that, so that we could talk while we fell asleep. And Hunter grabbed a sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got into their bedroom, they stripped down to their briefs, and I remembered Cole had mentioned to me once a while back that they had started sleeping in just their underwear. Since I hadn't originally planned on staying that night, I hadn't brought anything with me from home so far as overnight stuff, but since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I stripped down to my briefs as well. Though I felt a bit embarrassed, even though we were all guys there, I knew they wouldn't say anything or be judgmental. They had climbed into their beds and I quickly crawled into my sleeping bag. And after talking for a while about random stuff, we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning I got up because I had to pee, and so I quickly got out of my sleeping bag and went and did my business in the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom, I heard something in the family room, which was on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms in a particular bathroom I was using. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, thinking it must be either Cole or Hunter, until I got back into the bedroom and realized that both of them were still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room, we saw the two guys from the night before were there, and it was rather clear they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us as he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door, somehow managed to get in and unlocked it and open, and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him about the two guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple of minutes, several other cops were there, and they proceeded to enter the house. And after some searching, they caught the two guys. The cops figured out that the two guys must have entered from a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch, and had probably targeted that house because, while it wasn't empty, they probably realized that there were no adults there and figured that if we discovered them, it would be more easily dealt with than adults. To add insult to injury, while we were waiting outside while the cops searched the house, both to get the two guys and make sure that there were no one else with them, some of the neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about, and this included some kids who went to the same school as Cole and me, including a few who were in the 6th grade class with us. It was during that time that the three of us realized that we never had the chance to get dressed, so just like in stereotypical Nightmare, we had to stand outside in full view of everyone in just our briefs for what seemed like forever before being allowed back inside. When we went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with more than just a bit of snickering, stares, and ribbing for the next few weeks until school ended for the summer. I am on a throwaway account. This is for my safety. You'll find out why soon. To start this story off, I'd like to say I'm not a believer of the paranormal, which could be applied to some of the details if you are an avid believer. Some disclaimers are, my area is a pretty dangerous area. A lot of gangs and stuff live here, and a lot of crime happens. My garden is surrounded by fences. The back one leads to the main road. I suffer with audible and visual hallucinations. I have been living with my dad for around 3 years now. I have pretty intense mental health issues, so I don't know if I'm being delusional and or detaching from reality. My house is relatively outdated. We have heating that is controlled by a big flame in the center of the house that transport heat through the vents. And the majority of the house is made from wood. The floors, the stairs, which are extremely loud and creak a lot when you walk up and down them. We have 3 rooms upstairs, all connected by one hallway. And in the middle of that hallway, the entrance to the attic is on the ceiling. My father's door is directly across from mine, and the bathroom door is opposite the stairs banister, or railing, or whatever you want to call it. In between both of our rooms, remember that. It started off as me hearing noises, rustling around in the attic, but I figured that a bird had got stuck up there. That has happened before, and the majority of the noises were in the morning, after I wake up, and before I go to sleep. The normal times are around 7 to 9 a.m. and 10 to 11 p.m. I asked my father, and he had thought the same, so I shrugged it off. Around 2 to 3 months ago, the noises are becoming more consistent and common, but again I shrugged it off and drowned it out with music or YouTube videos whilst on my computer. I wouldn't let my paranoia get to me until one night. I had woken up around 3 a.m. and I could have sworn that I heard footsteps above me. I heard them moving across the attic floor. I could hear where the noises were coming from and where it was located in the attic. I ran into my father's room to wake him up. I'm not sure if we had startled something up there, but the noises stopped, and my father didn't believe me, and he said I was just hearing things. I suffer with audible hallucinations, sometimes visual, so I again shrugged it off, as a little reassurance is all that I needed. I hadn't heard anything for a couple weeks after that, and I'm not sure why. The morning and nightly noises were still persistent, however. We went out one day, me, my father, and my dogs. I had left my PC on. My door was slightly open and the bathroom door was closed. I leave my door open out of habit so my dogs can roam around the house when we are home. However, they do their bathroom in the bathroom, so we close the door while they are home, because we don't want them doing that. We were out for around 3 to 4 hours. We went on a nice walk. When we got back, I headed back upstairs into my room, and the events that happened are in order. I saw that my door was closed. Must have been a draft. Just before I got into my room, my father shouted up the stairs to me, and he had complained that I'd left milk and a packet of meat out of the fridge. I told him that I didn't. It wasn't me. My father is a very logical man. He thinks there's always a logical explanation to everything. So he was confused, but he said he must have done it himself because I was sure that I didn't take anything out of the fridge. Before going into my room after the conversation with my father, I saw that the bathroom light was on and the door was wide open. I went to search around the bathroom, but I couldn't find anything that could be necessarily out of suspicion. As I walked out of the bathroom, remembering that the banister is facing you when you leave the bathroom, I had seen some paint chipped away from the banister, something I have never noticed before. All of this could be explained as coincidence, or maybe I did close my door, open the bathroom door, leave the light on, never noticed paint chipped away on the wooden banisters. Maybe my dad did get some stuff out of the fridge and forgot to put it away. And that's how I thought at the moment. I did not want to believe that someone else was living in our house. But when I entered my room and sat down on my computer, I noticed that it was no longer on the YouTube video and on some European food website which was in English. However, no idea. Other than that, my computer had no other evidence of being tampered with on. Just that food website could have been a pop-up. Things had escalated from there. Me and my father kept hearing weird noises in the night and even during the days, bangs and thuds, etc. My father goes to work 5 days a week. He leaves at 5 a.m. and gets home around 7 p.m. I don't work, and I am home to hear everything. A lot of the times when I'm home I hear these noises, and my dogs do too, so I know I'm not hallucinating. My dogs started sniffing and peeing around the area underneath the attic latch. I have no idea why. My dogs are 3 to 4 years old at this point, both of them, and they've never really peed in a place they haven't before, if that makes sense. One Christmas, my dad had gone on holiday, leaving me on my own in the house for a few weeks, probably the scariest time of my life. I'm an adult. I should be able to defend myself, right? Well, everything was fine for the first few days. It was lovely to have time alone. I cooked a lot, spent a lot of time with my dogs, even made them some nice food too. I had somewhat stockpiled food into my fridge and freezer to last me for a few weeks, meaning I didn't really have to cook much, just to microwave and or defrost the day before. After I had cooked everything, one day had gone by. I noticed small things going missing from the refrigerator every day after waking up. I had these snack/bite-sized cheese wheels that I hadn't opened, but were open. Some of the food I made was going missing, and I was running out of milk a lot faster than I could have imagined. This persisted for around 3 days before I called a friend to come and stay downstairs. I explained the situation to him, and he was more than happy to stay on the couch for a few days to somewhat protect me. He's not scared of much, and he's very strong, so he could probably fight for himself if he needed to. The very first night he was there, we did a test. We acted as if we were leaving the house and gently slamming the front door to potentially prompt whatever was in my attic to come down and have free reign on the house while we were out. We practically tiptoed back into the center of the living room and sat in silence for about 10 minutes, whispering at most. We heard the noises, extremely close to the latch of the attic, almost like a scratching noise, to get their nails under the hatch to open it or something. I have no idea. As my friend heard it, he stamped his foot on the ground to intimidate, assuming that there was somebody up there. Not to mention my dog started growling at this point too. I knew I wasn't just hearing things, and I had another person for proof. At this point, I was extremely terrified, and my friend, which was surprising, was also scared too. He said that he wouldn't sleep at night if he heard the noises, and said he'd stay up all night with me if need be. I quickly responded to him saying something along the lines of, "Fuck no bro, we're leaving. I'm gonna pack my bags, bring the dogs, and we're going to your house." He agreed, and we left for the night. And I came back the following afternoon with him to see if anything in the house had changed. There were dishes in the sink that had been used and not washed, food missing from the fridge, and I had switched off all the electrics from the mains before I had left, such as PC, chargers, lamps, etc. I was sure someone was living in my house somewhere. My PC was on, but luckily I had a passcode on it so they couldn't get in. When I recognized that all of this had happened, I called the police. They came and searched all over my house. They didn't go into the attic. They just opened the latch and spoke up into the attic. No reply. They had no explanation for the food going missing and the computer being on, but they couldn't help apparently. I got some clean clothes, repacked, and I left. This time my friend dropped me off at my mother's and I stayed there for a few days with my dogs. Upon returning, one of my neighbors had caught me just as I was entering the house. They knew my father was away. They had said, "We saw 2 people climbing over your garden fence while you were gone," meaning they had jumped over onto the main road and made a run for it. It wasn't unusual for weird stuff to happen in my area, but that was too weird. Most of the time they hop from garden to garden if they're being chased by police. Anyway, I went into the house. As I left it, how it was when I left. Nothing had changed, no food had gone missing, and the same dirty dishes were in the sink. And that's the very last I heard any of the noises. It's been almost 1 year since I've heard anything, or anything strange had happened. Everything is normal. But knowing that people could have been living in my attic mere meters away from me is terrifying. Please let me know what you think, because to this day, I'm still terrified and confused, and I lack the feeling of being safe. What would you have done? Edit. This account is no longer active. Thank you all for your help. I've written down all your suggestions. I made this account for nothing else other than to ask for advice. As for criticism, I appreciate the comments, but I do not care for it. I'm only here for advice on this specific story. I know what happened, and whether or not you believe it is your choice. Thanks again. Goodbye. I've been a lurker here for quite a while, and I have decided to share one of my stories. I'm originally from a state where it's predominantly hot year-round, and I am not a big fan of warm weather. So when winter comes around, I like to have my windows open and spend as much time outside. Temperature average around the 50s, but that's beside the point. It was one of those chilly winter nights. I was about 10 years old, and the only people home were my 2 nannies and me. They were at the other side of the house watching TV while I was in my room. It was getting late and was likely around 10 p.m., so I decided to take a shower and hop in bed. Everything's fine. I hop out of the shower and get ready for bed. At this point, I should quickly go over the layout of my room. It's rectangular and has 2 windows facing the front door entrance to my house. From my windows, you can see a walkway to the front door, and the path is sort of gated in brick. Basically, you'd have to enter the driveway, turn left, and walk down a path that leads to my front door. My bed faces one of those windows, and I can see all the way down the path. Both windows have a mesh screen. This is where things get scary. Like I mentioned earlier, I had the window facing my bed open to let the cold air in. My room was well lit, so it's hard to see anything through the window. However, as soon as I turn off the light, I see the figure of a man with his face pressed upon the screen. In that moment, I feel his piercing gaze. He's motionless and smiling. He had facial hair that looked as if his whole face was covered in fur, and the hair on his head was the same length. I briefly thought I was imagining this and was seeing something that wasn't there because of all the foliage outside my window. I'd taken a couple quick steps towards the window to get a look before I confirmed what I saw was real. This all happened in a matter of 10 seconds. I bolted out of the room and towards the room my nannies were in. The hallways in my house are narrow and long, and large windows face the entrance. I didn't dare look out. I reach the room my nannies are in, and I tell them what happened, and they just laugh. To be quite honest, it was a boy who cried wolf situation. I was always a prankster and a bit imaginative, so it was hard to take me seriously when I was younger. I had to beg them to check with me, and from what I can remember, they took it seriously. We get to my room and no one's there. My window screen is left untouched and the man is gone. I don't think they were totally convinced, and neither were my parents. I couldn't sleep in my room for days because of the incident, and nothing was done about it. My house didn't even have an alarm system, so there was nothing stopping this person from coming back. I'm still very disappointed in how things were handled, and I had no power over anything. I have no idea how long that guy was out there for, and if he was watching me undress and then dress myself after I showered. I remember how fucked up his smile was. It was menacing. I'm glad that I was not harmed by this man, and that this was his only visit. At least I hope. I stopped opening my windows at night, and I missed the cool winter air. So, creepy guy with your face pressed against my window screen, let's never meet. Nobody knows what rock bottom truly is until they've hit it. Being abruptly fired from your job you've worked at for the past 10 years, and then catching your girl cheating on you with your replacement really makes a man think, hell, my student loans aren't even paid off yet. What a shit show this life is. After a rather boozy night that consisted of sending out about 4 dozen resumes and horrendously written cover letters, I passed out. When I woke up the next morning, I decided to at least try and make some money at home while waiting for an interview. At that moment, I thought that the best way to go about it was completing those internet surveys that yielded $5 Subway gift cards and other shit like that after about an hour of answering questions. I mean, I didn't have any other marketable skills that could have yielded immediate income. It was either that or wasting the day away playing computer games. At least I wouldn't have to pay for food. I did these surveys for about 5 hours before nearly passing out. It was way more excruciating than I had originally anticipated. At the end of those 5 hours, I'd accumulated about $45 in cash and gift cards, $9 an hour. Not like I was making much more than that before. I was about to close my laptop up for the day and head to a bar in an attempt to drown out my melancholy when I first saw it. It shouldn't even have been noticeable, but for one reason or another it was. At the bottom corner of the website that I was on existed a tiny, singular advertisement. Maybe it was the simplicity that got me. Plain black letters in a tacky font that read, "Surveys for cash," overlapped a completely white background. At least, they were direct with the message. One more couldn't hurt, I thought. Might as well scrape together a little bit more booze money before heading out. I sat back down, clicked on the picture link, and prepared myself to grind through some more painstaking inquiries. The first few questions were simple enough. I guess they weren't really questions, but more data collection. My name, age, and occupation. I thought it was kind of weird that they also asked my height and weight, but it wasn't unheard of. The first real question was a different story though. I must have stared at it, eyes wide open and mouth agape, for God knows how long. What the actual hell? In plain English, this is what popped up on my screen. How strong is your urge to currently look behind you? There were 5 options below, ranging from not at all to overwhelming. There was no feasible reason why I should have been afraid at that moment, but I was. I tightened my breathing, trying to make out any subtle noises behind me. There were none. After maybe about 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to look. There was nothing. I sighed in relief and scoffed at myself at the same time. This must have been some kind of joke. However, I decided to entertain it, answering neutral and clicking on to the next question. This is what it read. Why would you look behind you? I smirked, funny, before simply typing in, I don't know, in the response box and once again clicking next. This was the third question. You're on a plane. Apart from you, there is only one other passenger, who is sitting somewhere behind you. At some point, you get up to go to the washroom and find that the man is gone. You check to see if he is in the only bathroom on the plane, but he isn't. What do you do? Again, I must have stupidly stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. Was this some kind of obscure personality test? I mean, it must have been right? I put the same question that I used for the last question. I don't know. It was true. I didn't know. How was I supposed to answer this shit? I clicked next again, now more intrigued than anything. The fourth question went like this. You wake up in the woods, unfamiliar to you. It's nighttime, and the moonlight provides you with only slight visibility. About 30 feet away from you, there is a small, dimly illuminated cabin. The door is open, and a smiling woman is motioning for you to come in. Do you go? Explain why. This question wasn't necessarily weirder than the last one, so my conjecture that this was some kind of odd personality test that was still feasible. I actually make an attempt to answer this one, something along the lines of going into the cabin because there's simply nowhere else to go. Once again, I click next. Probably shouldn't have. The questions started getting fucked up. They weren't too gory or explicit, not anything like that. They were just stranger, weirder, more psychologically disturbing. If you're wondering why the hell I kept going, I can't really give you an explicit answer to that. I just felt like I had to. It was an esoteric, creeping sensation that I can't quite explain away, but I could never shake it. So I just went on. Some of the answers that stood out were, suppose that you wake up one night to find an elevator in your house. During every midnight after that, it opens up for 5 minutes, revealing an exact copy of yourself that gets progressively more injured as time goes on. Do you keep living like this? Or do you enter the elevator once and end it all? And you're in a hotel room but are awoken by rapid knocking at your window. You peek through the blinds, seeing what appears to be a man missing both his eyes. He puts his mouth to the glass and tells you to kill the woman in the bathroom immediately. Do you listen to him? This was one of my least favorites. You are watching home videos with your mother. One of the tapes includes footage of her being murdered by a masked intruder. Your mother simply laughs at this footage without saying anything. In your opinion, is this a cause for concern? In addition to this insanity-inducing shit, there were some rather disconcerting events happening in real life as well. I received a knock at the door about 30 minutes in. I looked through my peephole to find a guy standing there, frantically shaking his head and mouthing, "No," while making direct eye contact with me. He looked terrified. Obviously, I didn't open up. I received about 10 phone calls from somebody named The Auditor on my caller ID. They left a message every time, but each one was just a recording that consisted of somebody saying numbers through heavy static. Actually, it sounded more like screaming now that I think about it. About an hour into this thing, and I was on the verge of a mental breakdown, I was petrified of looking behind me, even though there was no indication that anything should have been there. I heard some soft scratching coming from my vent at one point, so I moved my couch over it. Eventually, I reached what appeared to be the end of the survey. However, it wasn't a question. It was simply a statement. Don't let them in. They're not to be trusted. Almost as if it were on cue, I heard more knocking at my door about 5 seconds after reading this. As slowly and silently as I could, I moved over and looked through the peephole once again. It was a different person than the one I'd seen earlier. She was a woman, looking to be in her mid-20s. She was wearing a thick blazer, despite it being around 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside. She was also wearing sunglasses, so I could never really tell where she was actually looking. She eventually took a piece of paper out of her pocket and slipped it under the door. I looked down and read it. Its line: "Leave your apartment immediately." It's been about half an hour since. I can't bring myself to look at the computer screen, nor at the woman outside. She's still there. I can see the shadows of her feet from underneath my door. I heard my bedroom window open a few minutes ago, but I've since jammed the door shut with a chair. I can hear some kind of distorted muttering coming from behind it now. Maybe rock bottom wasn't so bad. But what the fuck am I supposed to do here? This happened in October of 2019. I just came across the photos on my phone, but I don't know if I should upload them. So it was a weekend and I figured it would be a good idea to go out of town for a day and introduce my girlfriend to my mom for the first time. She lives out on the plains on 40 acres. The house and land are a quarter mile off the road into the field, with our long driveway dividing the land of two neighbors. We arrived around noon, and my brother and his wife also happened to be out there visiting that day, so I introduced the girlfriend to everyone and all the dogs. I noticed that the loudest and most obnoxious dog, the beagle, didn't come greet us, and my mom explained that the previous night she went to grab something from the truck, and on her way in, the dog had darted out the door and ran off into the field, and he still hasn't come back. This isn't all that uncommon for a dog to run off in the night and come back a couple days later. Later that day, my mom recalls that her and my nieces were woke up around 1 a.m. to all the dogs howling and barking non-stop, just going nuts. Eventually they stop and everyone goes back to sleep. We continue to have a nice quiet day out in the middle of nowhere for a few more hours when we notice that this hawk has been flying around the same spot all day in the field, so my brother and his wife go to check it out while I mess around doing something else. A few minutes later, my brother comes back and tells me he found the missing beagle, but something is wrong. I should go check it out before telling my mom. I follow my brother into the field expecting to find a dead dog. As we're walking, I see a spot of blood and think that it was probably coyotes. He shows me a trail of blood that leads to a larger puddle and another trail. The dog seems to have been dragged around some. That trail led to an area in the field where the dog lay. As soon as I saw the dog, something looked wrong about the scene. All the plants around him were trampled, and something looked different about him. I took a few more steps and realized that he is missing skin. This wasn't just a few bits missing from a fight or birds picking at him though. The only fur or skin left on him was his head, tail, and paws. With very distinguished straight lines, he had been skinned. Some sick person had killed, skinned, and taken the pelt of our dog in the middle of the night, only a couple 100 feet from the front door. Of course, we called the cops. They took 2 hours to arrive and took pictures. We looked around the area and noticed tire tracks, but we couldn't tell how old they were. We also found a pile of horse shit that looked pretty fresh close by. Did whoever did this ride a horse out there? To this day, the cops have never followed up with anything, and nothing else has happened yet. Nature cams were installed and fences have been mended so dogs can't get out, but we still have no idea who did it. I came across the pictures on my phone today and can't seem to bring myself to delete them. Oh, before I forget, man, I was wondering if you could help me with something. The cashier, an acne-riddled kid who looked to be in his late teens or early 20s, looked up from shoving the bag of potato chips, 2 sodas, and a pack of Lucky Strikes into a plastic bag. For a moment, he just stood there, seemingly frozen in mid-action. Then he finally answered, "Yeah, what's up, man?" I let out a barely perceptible sigh. I had been half afraid that I would be told to take a long walk off a short pier, to put it politely. Feeling relieved, I reached into my back pocket for what was there. You see, I seem to have, well, sort of gotten lost out here. I decided to take a late night drive and ended up getting turned around on all of these 2-lane back roads. I unfolded the map and set it on the counter so he and I could both see it before continuing. So I was hoping you could point out on here roughly where we are, and more importantly, the way to get back to the main road. There was another long stretch of silence, and then the kid began to laugh, softly at first and then louder. "Dude, a paper map?" He managed out between wheezes. "Are you for real? What year do you think this is, 1993? For my part, I simply let out a resigned sigh. I'd had a bad feeling I'd be getting this sort of reaction from someone his age, and it looked like I'd been proven correct. Can't say I didn't see it coming. He wiped tears from the corners of his eyes and looked at me. "Seriously, bro, don't you have a GPS in your car or something?" he asked. Immediately, I hooked a thumb over my shoulder, pointing out the glass entry door at the beige sedan sitting at the gas pumps. "Not in a Honda Accord from 1979, I replied simply. As he looked behind me out the door, I could see he wanted to make another quip, probably something about how I should buy a newer car or something. Thankfully though, he kept it to himself. Instead, he leaned over the map and, still chuckling softly to himself, began looking at it. A few moments later, he snapped his fingers. "Ha! I still got it," he said proudly, then pushed his finger down near the middle of the map and looked up at me. "We're right about here, roughly 6 or 7 miles outside Placer." I leaned over the counter to see as he drew his finger away. "Here?" He nodded, and I pulled a pen out of my pocket, circling the area as a reminder once I left, then examined the map further. "Okay, so it seems I could take more than a few roads to get back to Interstate 5, right?" The kid nodded again, clearly already bored with the unusual interaction by the slightly annoyed look which had begun to cross his face. "Sure," he said simply, then placed my bagged items on top of the map. "That'll be $14.50 for this and $28.50 for the gas." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet, withdrawing 3 20s and handing them to him. The register let out its trademark ding as it shot open, and he placed the bills in it before pulling out and handing me my change. Placing it and my wallet back into my pocket, I picked up the bag and folded the map back up. "Thanks for the help," I said as I turned to head out the door. "Yeah, no problem," I heard him mutter at me as I crossed to the front door and pushed it open. A small bell hung from the inside handle jangled as I stepped outside and let the door swing shut behind me. The sounds of the refrigerators humming and the fluorescent lights softly buzzing was replaced by those of a summertime forest at night. Crickets and cicadas buzzed loudly in the grass around the store, almost overwhelming the buzzing sound of the lights over the pumps. The sound of an owl hooting loudly echoed through the trees, followed by the loud call of what had to be an elk. I inhaled the clean air before heading down the steps for my car. Pulling open the driver's door, I took one last look around before dropping into the driver's seat. "So, did you find out where you are?" asked a voice from the passenger seat. For a split second, a wave of confusion and panic swept over me, and I spun in my seat. It was immediately replaced by a wave of embarrassment, amplified as my friend began to let out a deep laugh. "Dude, were you in there for that long that you forgot I was out here waiting for you?" Not wanting to admit I had just done that, I shook my head. "Nah bro, not that. Just dealing with the kid in there was a major headache." He nodded sympathetically. Craig was one of my close friends. Ever since we met each other, we'd immediately clicked, and had stuck with each other from that point on. And one thing that we both loved to do was take late night drives to nowhere, simply driving around with no destination in mind, listening to the radio and occasionally sharing a joint one of us would buy. This is the first time we've ever gotten lost though. I reached into the bag, pulling out the bottle of Mr. Pibb and handing it to him. "Here," I said simply, before pulling the Lucky Strikes out and chucking the rest into the back seat. Pulling the key from my pocket, I slid it into the ignition and turned it, the car's buzzer sounding as the dash lights came on. A moment later, the inline four quietly rumbled to life with its traditional burble. Tearing open the package, I pulled a cigarette from the pack and struck it into the corner of my mouth before reaching to push in the car's cigarette lighter. As it did, I shot a glance back towards the store and froze. A small shiver shot down my spine as I realized the kid was standing at the door and staring out at us. What the actual hell? Craig caught my gaze and turned to look at himself. Dude, what the hell is his problem? I shook my head as the lighter popped back out, signaling it was ready to use. I pushed the glowing red coil against the tip of the smoke for a moment until it was lit, then placed it back into its slot. I pulled it from my lips and exhaled a cloud of smoke before answering, feeling more than a bit unnerved. I don't know, but honestly man, that's more than a bit creepy. I shot one last glance. The kid hadn't even blinked once. He was just staring with an off-putting intensity out the glass. "Come on, let's get out of here," Craig said, echoing the thoughts swimming through my mind. I put the car into first gear and eased off the clutch, the car beginning to roll forward. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him turn and shoot the bird at the kid as we slid out from under the lights into the dark. I turned the car left and began heading the same way we came. Well, the good thing is, yeah, I did find out where we are. I pulled the map from my pocket and handed it to my friend. I heard him fumbling for a moment, and then a small flashlight clicked on as he aimed it at the map. "Dude, how did we make it almost as far east as Placer?" he asked, with a slightly astonished tone. "Longer drive than normal, I guess," I answered, rolling down my window to flick the ashes from my smoke out. I shot a glance at the analog clock on the dashboard. 2:45 it read. I let out a small sigh. Great, Vanessa is likely worrying up a storm about us right now. Me especially. Ever since we'd started dating 5 years ago, my girlfriend had always been rather apprehensive about my habit of taking long, late-night drives when I couldn't sleep. She always feared I'd get into an accident, either with another car, wrap my Honda around a tree, or hit an animal. Most of the time, I would come home to find her sitting up, waiting for me. Worry clearly etched into her beautiful sapphire eyes. I bit my lip slightly. "Hey, you think I should text Vanessa and let her know we're okay?" I asked Craig. I heard him let out a snort. Honestly, bro? No. I know the woman loves you to death and I'm happy she cares so much, but she's gotta learn you know what you're doing. Plus, you two need your space. It's not healthy how much time you two spend together. I flicked the remnants of my cigarette out the window and let out a snort of my own. It's called being in love, dude. You should try it sometime, I joked, causing him to let out a laugh. Nah, thanks, I enjoy being single too much. Shaking my head, I stared out the windshield as the headlights guided our way. I felt a slight sense of unease creep up upon me as I watched the two-lane road stretch out before us, the moon in the sky almost completely blocked by the trees over our heads. I hadn't seen another car on the road for 2 hours at least. Well, what'd you expect, Derek? You drove into the boonies. There's only ghost towns out here. Why don't you try driving all the way to Idaho next time? Shaking my thoughts away, I fumbled in the center console for a moment before pulling out a mixtape. A bit of music would help me feel better. I pushed it into the car's cassette player and hit play. A moment later, the pounding bass and synths of Dance with the Dead's That House began blasting from the speakers. Craig let out a whoop of excitement. Dude, yes, that's the kind of tunes we need for a drive like this. He rolled down the passenger window, sticking his head out the window to whoop and holler into the night. I shook my head, unable to keep from grinning at his antics. Friggin' goofball. The playful mood helped settle my mind, and I felt myself relax into the seat, the tension flowing out of my body and out the window. For a few moments, that's how things went. The road stretching out ahead of us and then disappearing into the blackness behind us, the music blasting out from the radio, and the soft roar of the engine in the background. I shot another look at the backlit clock. Now it read 5 minutes to 3. We should be at the highway in a minute. The thought released the last wisp of tension in my body and fumbled into the back seat for the bag, catching it with the tips of my fingers. I pulled my bottle of soda from it and, holding the bottle to the steering wheel, cracked the cap. I lifted it to my lips and took a swig, taking my eyes off the road for a split second to tilt my head back. I looked back at the road and nearly spit it all onto the windshield. In the second I'd stopped looking, a figure had stepped onto the road. Fucking hell, I shouted, jamming my feet on the brake and clutch as hard as I could. The rear wheels of the car locked up, and the ear-piercing sound of squealing tires filled the cabin. To my horror, the tail end of the car began sliding out. Oh hell no 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 no! For a few seconds, the world around us became a blur of shapes and colors, and I feared at any moment we'd smash into a tree or begin rolling. Thankfully, the car finally came to a stop with a screech of protest from the suspension. We were facing back the way we'd come. I could tell from the black lines on the road, which had once been the rubber of my tires. I gripped the steering wheel with almost a death grip, my heart furiously pounding in my chest. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps. There was no movement in the car for a few seconds, before Craig reached forward and snapped the music off. Dude, what the fuck, he shouted at me, his face looking as pale as mine must be. I didn't say a word to him. Instead, I pulled up on the handbrake, ripped off my seatbelt, and practically kicked the door open. Stepping out onto the pavement, I stepped to the front of the car on unsteady legs until I was squarely in between the headlight beams. I looked around, first at the road ahead, then at the forest on either side. There was nothing there. What the? I turned and looked behind me. Over the roof of the car, the red glow of the taillights illuminated a few feet ahead, but beyond that, nothing but blackness. I turned again, looking out at the darkness beyond the branches. No movement disturbed the bushes and branches, and aside from the quiet hum of the car's engine, it was silent. I shook my head. Did I just imagine things? I shook it again. No, I know for a fact I didn't hallucinate. There was someone there. The sound of the car door opening made me turn. Seeing Craig step out of the car, leaving the door open, he immediately came over to me. You have exactly 20 seconds to explain to me what the hell just happened before I lose it, bro, he explained. For a second I fought to find my voice. Then I answered, Dude, I'm not crazy. Someone stepped out on the woods and onto the road. It looked like a chick and I thought it was gonna freaking hit her. I realized I'd been holding in a breath and let it out, trying desperately to get myself to relax. Craig gave me a confused look. You serious, man? I nodded. He pulled the flashlight he'd used to look at the map from his pocket and flicked it on, aiming it first at the tree line on one side of the road, then to the other. After doing this a few times, he turned back to me. Well, whoever it was, they're not there anymore. His brow furrowed. But why would a chick be out here in the middle of nowhere, he muttered, more to himself than me. I still answered, I don't know, man. It's frickin' Josephine County. For as many good people live out here, there's also a bunch of weirdos. I heard my friend let out a snort of laughter and reply, but something had caught my attention. A feeling which had slammed into me with all the weight of a Peterbilt. The feelings of eyes boring into the back of my skull. I spun around, looking back towards the car and seeing nothing there, but the feeling remained, and I didn't like it one bit, especially when the feeling came again, this time from the direction I'd just been facing a moment ago. Realization dawned on me, and I felt a shiver shoot up my spine, along with the flicker of fear. Oh shit, I whispered. Craig turned to look at me. What? He asked. Seeing the look on my face, he repeated, What? I looked up at him, speaking with a bit of a weak voice. Let's get back in the car. Right now. He didn't argue. Thankfully, he was already moving for the open passenger door, and I matched his pace as the feeling of being watched intensified, as if someone were rapidly approaching from the woods. Oh hell. I broke, first into a run, then a full sprint for the last 10 feet, tearing at the door handle and practically launching myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door closed behind me. I jammed down on the door lock, seeing Craig do the same. He turned to me, his face hidden in the dark, but his voice giving a perfect mental image of it. What the hell was that, man? The tone of it gave away the fact he'd felt, even for the briefest of moments, the same feeling of dread and fear I'd have. You remember those videos of people driving on empty roads in the middle of the night only to have someone step into the road and get them to stop, I asked? A sharp intake of breath came from the passenger seat before he answered, finishing my thought, and then a bunch of people spring out of the woods trying to ambush them? Oh hell no. My thoughts exactly. Time to friggin' leave. I released the parking brake, pulling on my seatbelt and jamming the car into first gear. The tires chirped as I hit the gas, and a moment later, we were accelerating away. As we did, the feeling of being watched rapidly fell away to nothing, and I allowed myself to let out a relieved sigh. We drove in silence for another few minutes before I finally spoke again. I think we're in the clear, man. Craig let out a soft laugh. Thank fuck for that. I nodded, then reached for the soda, which had fallen, wedging itself by the parking brake. Snatching it up, I uncapped it and took another swig, the still cool liquid feeling amazing going down my throat. Recapping and dropping it behind me into the back seat, I let out a laugh of my own. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, Greg, but I think after this I may take a bit of a break from late night drives for a bit. This just got under my skin too much. For a few moments longer than I thought, there was nothing, and then he answered, As much as that sucks, bro, I can understand. No problem at all. I thought I could detect a small tone of sadness in his voice, along with something else I couldn't place, but then I heard him sit up straight. Hey, Jake? He asked, a bit of a concerned tone now etched into it. Yeah? I heard him draw another breath. Shouldn't we be on the highway by now? Or at least see the lights of passing cars? I hadn't been fully concentrating on anything except the next stretch of road and my headlights, but at his words I jerked my head to look beyond them. What the actual hell? He was right. The lights of cars and trucks flashing by on the freeway should be visible through the dark. I clearly remembered looking in my side rear mirror as we turned onto the road from the highway, seeing the ever-present white and red clothes zipping by both ways at close to the same distance we were now. That wasn't the case anymore. All I could see in front of us was darkness. Darkness in the woods on either side of the road. For a moment, I lifted my foot off the accelerator, letting the car slow down a little bit as my brain whirred. He's gotta be mistaken. Hell, I've gotta be mistaken. We just haven't gotten close enough to the highway yet. You know these old roads, Derek. They often end up longer than they first look. Feeling somewhat relieved by the thought, I said it out loud to Craig. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't completely convinced. And for that matter, as much as I repeated it mentally to myself, I couldn't completely convince myself either. It was as if seeing this woman step in the road had shaken me more than I'd first thought. Pushing back down on the gas, I shifted into fourth gear and watched the speedometer flirt with 55 miles an hour. For a few more minutes, neither one of us saw anything as we drove in silence, and then Craig let out a cry. There, a light. For a moment, a surge of hope welled up inside me, and I craned over the steering wheel looking to see the highway. It was dashed as I saw it. It was only a streetlight, standing solitary guard on the side of the road like a sentry. Beneath it stood an old, worn sign which seemed to have been shot at many times with both BB pellets and actual bullets. I slowed the car some as it came towards us so I could read it, and felt a wave of confusion fall over me. Golden. 2 miles. The fuck? Craig breathed out as he read the sign. It passed by us, the streetlight momentarily bathing the interior of the car in light and showing the confused, worried look on his face. How the hell did we end up by Golden? Golden is a ghost town, one which attracts visitors every year to check out the standing buildings. It was a mining town which had a population of a few hundred people, but once the prospects dried up in the mid to early 20th century, it became the ghost town it is today. Its biggest claim to fame nowadays was being featured on Ghost Adventures a few years back. Craig repeated his question, but I wasn't able to answer him. My thoughts were racing inside my head. There's no freaking way. Golden is miles to the north of Placer. There are no roads connecting the two areas from what I saw on the map. Not to mention we've been driving in a straight line since leaving the gas station. I honestly don't know, man, I finally answered, my voice conveying how rattled I truly was. In the car's dark interior, I saw him put his head in his hands. I fumbled for my pack of cigarettes, pulling another out with slightly unsteady fingers and pushing in the cigarette lighter. A few moments later, the turnoff for the ghost town flashed by on the right. I saw the dark, hulking shape of the church's spire rising out of the dark for a moment, then it was behind us. The lighter popped out, and I pressed it to the smoke, lighting it and putting it back. I decided I needed to try and calm the rising tension that was filling the car's interior. Look, however we ended up here, man, the fact is we can't be far from the highway. So let's just keep our wits about us, keep calm, and when we get back over to my place, you, me, and Vanessa can have a good laugh over this. Sound good? I heard my friend take a deep breath, then let it out with a whoosh. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a plan, he said, and he let out a soft laugh, and I felt him pat my shoulder. Thanks, Derek. You're a seriously good friend. Glad I've got you. I nodded, then realized he may not be able to see it in the dark. No problem, man, I said. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. Only 5 minutes had passed since I'd looked at it, and yet it felt more like it'd been 30. Time seems different when you're stressed. For a few minutes there was only darkness, and then a light appeared in the distance. Ha! There we go, I exclaimed. I waited to see the sign for the on-ramp appear, and felt a shiver shoot up my spine as the sign for Golden flew by again. That's... What? Craig didn't say anything, but I felt him stiffen in the passenger seat, showing he'd seen it as well. As the streetlight and sign disappeared behind us, a feeling began to creep up on me. Another shiver shot up my spine as I realized that it was the same feeling I'd had when we'd gotten out of the car. The feelings of eyes on me. My eyes shifted to the blur of the trees on either side of the car, but I saw no one out there. The turn-off for the ghost town approached again. I heard Craig let out another deep breath. "Derek, pull us over, please," he said simply. His voice was shaking, and as much as I didn't want to stop, I did as he asked. Pulling over just before the turn-off, he ripped his seatbelt off, shoving the door open and stepping out. I watched him stride to the front of the car and stand there for a minute. He seemed to start shaking a bit, and I realized just how much this was getting to him. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle when I glanced at the clock and froze. The clock was still showing 3 a.m. The hands hadn't moved at all. A feeling of shock washed over me like a wave as I tapped it with my fingers to see if it was merely stuck, but it refused to begin moving again. "Okay, what the fuck is going on?" I whispered to myself. I reached into my pocket, fishing out my phone and turning on the screen. Like the clock, it too showed the time as 3 a.m. The feeling of being watched began to intensify, and I glanced at Craig, standing in the dark before looking down, beginning to type a text out to Vanessa. "Hey, baby girl, just wanted to let you know that Craig and I are okay. We're trying to get back to the highway, but have gotten a bit turned around out here. Do me a favor, and if I don't text you again in 15 minutes, text me back, okay? I love you." I replaced the phone back in my pocket. I knew I should have been more honest, but I was beginning to feel a little freaked out by the weird situation. I didn't want to worry her any more than necessary, as it would make me start to freak out worse. Pushing open the door, I got out and walked around, stopping near the front headlight. "Dude, you alright?" I asked him after a moment. He didn't answer, but happily he seemed to have stopped shaking. I repeated my question. When he didn't answer my second and third calls, I began to feel a new sensation creep up on me, a potent mixture of dread and fear. "Craig, dude, you're creeping me the fuck out. Please say something." He finally turned to look at me, and in the semi-glow of the headlights, I saw his face had gone a bit pale. He raised his finger and pointed, saying only one word. "Look." My eyes followed where he had gestured, and I began to feel like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. The cigarette dangling from my lips fell from my mouth to the ground. Standing about 15 feet away, just inside the tree line, was a figure. It was drenched in gloom, but with a gasp I realized it was the same woman who nearly caused me to wreck. "Oh, fuck me sideways, man," I swallowed, finding my voice. We should get back in the car, Craig." He nodded almost immediately. "I think you might be right," he answered, his voice wavering. Not taking our eyes off the figure, we slowly backed up until we reached our respective doors and climbed in. I didn't even bother putting on my seatbelt. I just jammed the gear shifter into the first and floored it. Dirt and gravel kicked up behind us and the car shot forward onto the road. This time I didn't let up on the gas. I kept my foot hard down, the engine beginning to roar as I shifted into third and fourth. The speedometer reached 60 as I shifted into fifth gear, the feeling of being watched intensifying with each passing second. I prayed that I would see something, anything ahead of us, an intersection, a house, a freaking out-of-use payphone for fuck's sake. And then my blood turned to ice as a light appeared ahead of us, the exact same one as before, with the sign underneath. My eyes flickered to the clock and terror shot through me as I saw it was still frozen at the same time. "This isn't good, bro," Craig said from the passenger seat. I agreed with him, but didn't say it out loud. I kept my foot to the floor, the speedometer now hitting 80. The turnoff appeared again, and what I saw made me want to scream. The woman had gotten closer to the road, and she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, I saw others, the outlines of other people, dozens, possibly more. They all stood facing the road, watching us fly by, and then they disappeared into the rear view mirror. "Fuck," I breathed out as the light and sign passed by once again. This time the mass of people had gotten even closer to the road. The woman stood in front of them all, and for a split second, the headlights illuminated her. Another flash of ice shot through my veins as I saw the river of blood pouring down the front of her nightgown, one that looked to be decades old. "What the hell do we do?" Craig asked me, his voice steady, yet filled with fear. The same I felt. I just shook my head. "I don't know, man," was all I could say. The streetlight began to appear again when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, causing me to nearly slam on the brakes in surprise. I fumbled in my pocket for it, seeing Craig look over at me. I texted Vanessa when we stopped, told her to reply in a few minutes. Now I think I'm going to tell her to call the cops or something. He didn't reply, instead turning to look out the windshield at the approaching light. Flickering my eyes from the phone to the road and back, I forced myself to not look at the turnoff as we zoomed past the lights. I didn't want to see how close those ghosts, demons, whatever they are, had gotten to the road. I flipped my finger, pushing away the lock screen and tapping on the messenger icon as the light began to appear once more. Vanessa's message automatically opened, and for a moment relief like I'd never felt surged through me at the small bit of normalcy I had in my grasp. I froze. I didn't even look up at the road. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on a single sentence, reading and rereading it. A wave of confusion passed over me, enough I spoke aloud. "The fuck?" Craig spoke up. "What? What'd you say?" I didn't answer him. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, trying to understand, but it was like I was hitting a mental wall. I tried to think of something else as another thought came to me, but again the same block was coming to me. As it did, a new wave of fear began to rise up in me, one for an entirely new reason than the terrifying loop flying by outside. The speedometer now showed we were doing 90, and then Craig spoke. "Can I ask you a question, man?" Ice filled every vein in my body, not at his question, but at his voice. It was different. Gone was the fear and tension he'd had not even a minute ago. Now he just sounded flat. No, not flat. I couldn't tell why, but the way his voice was, it almost made me feel like he was smiling. Another shiver cascaded up my spine as I finally forced myself to answer, my mouth dry as cotton. "What?" He answered as we began to fly under the streetlight. "Are you scared?" For whatever reason, the question made me turn to him just as the light whizzed over us. For a split second, the car's interior became illuminated again. My eyes locked with his. The lights flew by, the turn-off appeared again, and for a moment, my eyes flicked up to see the woman was right next to the road. Bathed completely in the headlights, I finally caught a glimpse of her face, and then I was screaming. My fingers tearing at the door handle as the car swerved to the right. I saw a tree flying towards the windshield. I didn't think. I just forced the door open and leapt out. The ground rapidly flew up to meet me. Darkness. I woke up in a hospital room, a bandage covering my head and one arm in a sling. My chest felt like it was on fire as well. The first thing I saw was Vanessa, who, upon seeing me wake up, burst into tears and wrapped her arm around me. A few moments later, the doctor came in. He told me that I was a lucky man, apparently. I'd gotten away with only a gash in my head requiring staples, severely bruised ribs, and a broken arm. Shocking for having dove out of a car at what appeared to be tremendous speed, he said, raising an eyebrow. Then he told me the police wanted to speak to me. He showed them in, and 2 officers entered, asking me many questions. I told them exactly what had happened, well, except for 2 small details anyways. They appeared to take my account seriously and promised to look into it. "We've had some reports similar to yours, sir," one of them answered, tentatively. Then they showed me how I'd been found, how a father and son who owned a gas station nearby had been out driving and had come across first my destroyed Honda, which had wrapped itself around a tree and then some, and then lying unconscious in the grassy ditch, me. They didn't say who they'd been, but I had a fair idea who they'd been, at least the son anyways. That night was 3 months ago. I've been at home, resting and healing this entire time. It's given me plenty of time to think, plenty of time to process everything. I try not to think about that night, about many of it. I feel like I'll go insane if I do, especially after the police told me that they found nobody else at the scene of the wreck, only the passenger door hanging open. But I've had to. After receiving an email from an unknown address, one claiming to be the son, the kid I saw in the gas station that night, he told me things that his father told him he'd seen for years that he didn't believe at all until that night when he looked out the door at my car. That's when he'd frantically called his father. As I type this out, I feel myself begin to violently shake, remembering the woman's face indeed a ghost. As it flashed in the headlights, the look of horror plastered there as she frantically waved at me to get my attention. The same look the others must have had, remembering turning to look at Craig as the light flickered over and seeing the smile on his face. A smile wider than any human being's could possibly be, filled with shark-like teeth as black eyes stared hungrily at me, the same shark-like smile the kid told me he'd been flashed as I'd pulled away. But mostly I remember the single line of text Vanessa sent me, what caused me to rack my brain, trying frantically to recall my friendship with the figure sitting opposite me, and horror filling me as I realized I couldn't think of one single memory. What will keep me from ever taking late night drives again? The three words that will remain burned into my memory forever. Darling, who's Craig? Hi, never posted before, and not quite sure if this is the right place, but here we go anyways. This is one of the scariest things to happen to me as a kid, and it has always stuck out to me. It was about 10 years ago, and I was 9 years old. I had just moved back to California with my family. We were to be living with my grandmother in a cramped 2-bed, 2-bath, and I was excited. My grandma was an older, pretty religious Filipino woman, a converted Hindu and faithful Catholic. I'm not sure if that's a contradiction because I don't know much about either religion, but her house had lots of shrines, candles, paintings of Jesus and Hindu gods, and this overall weird energy I could palpably feel as a kid. It's important to note that I now consider myself a very open person, someone who may unknowingly attract these sorts of occurrences. This may not be important to the story, or maybe so, I'm not entirely sure. But as a kid, I would hear music and voices whispering to me, as well as smell strange things when triggered by certain words. At the time of this event, this was something I was used to and knew about myself. Because of this, I had some interest into Wicca and the occult. Not as much as I would later have because I was still a child, but enough to often sit on the floor of my aunt's dimly lit and cramped room and look at her books on witchcraft. I don't know when and why, but around that time, I began to have super strange, frequent, and all-encompassing thoughts of the devil and demons. Like it would always be running through my mind, and I would comfort myself by remembering to recite some of the Hail Mary my mother had taught me. My aunt's room had a really creepy, suffocating feel to it, but I'd always spend time alone up there even though I felt as if I were something watching me. I could place the energy, gaze, I guess, coming from in front of her closet. My aunt is mentally ill and at the time was not on meds, so her room was filled with stuff, but especially the closet. It was always open, about a couple feet or so, with lots of her things kind of stuffed in and falling out. And it was always pitch black on that side of the room, especially in the closet from what I could see. I slept up there with her and was so jumpy and afraid all the time that I couldn't even shower by myself. One night, my aunt goes out with my mother, my little brother, and I go to sleep on her bed. I remember I was so afraid, and I couldn't stop staring at this creepy, green fairy thing that my aunt had hung from a string near her bed. It always seemed to sway, and I felt that when I looked in its eyes, it was sentient or something.
I was in between my mom and brother, but sleeping the opposite way from them at their feet, staring at this space near the closet. I went to sleep, and in my dream, woke up. I sat straight up and felt such dread and fear I'll never forget. In the dream, I tapped my mom awake, and she looked at me in surprise. She said, "Ayana, you're bleeding." I then felt my nose and realized blood was dripping from it. Then my eyes, my ears, and my mouth. I got super freaked out and said, "Mommy, I've been thinking about the devil a lot." And something along the lines of how I couldn't stop and was really scared. But by the time I was done talking, she'd actually laid back and gone back to sleep. Then, in a moment of fucking horror, something was on top of me. It was dark and I couldn't see, but I remember thinking it was a little white man. It was sitting on my chest with its knees on my collarbones, growling, hissing, making terrifying noises while it was literally, and I mean literally, choked the absolute hell out of me. I was trying to flail my arms around, but I couldn't move. It lasted so long I remember thinking, "Oh my god, when will this end?" And then as suddenly as that, I awoke for real. I was laying on my back, breathing heavily, and feeling sore, in the exact same spot as the dream. Briefly I thought, oh no, is this real? Will it happen again? So I lay in silence until I could muster the courage to turn and look at the closet. I felt absolutely horrified. The space was radiating the most intense, deep hate and evil I will never forget. It has stuck with me for so long. I could just feel something staring at me so intensely. And also the sense that it knew that I knew it was there, that we were looking at each other in that moment. I rubbed my mom's hip for comfort and laid back down, immediately starting on a Hail Mary. I did it again and again until I could fall back asleep. For some reason, I also felt, although I was asleep, that whatever it was, left. I could sense it walking out of the room. When I woke up, I went to stand near the closet and the space felt kind of empty. Anyways, grew up and forgot about this story. Used to tell it to my friends for a scary laugh, but I've just finished my first year of college and moved back here for the summer, so it's been on my mind. This wasn't even the most frightening thing to happen in this house, so we'll see if any other future things happen. Hopefully not. LMFAO. And alright, I'll give you a second to process that. Let me know what you think about these two stories I read down below. So yeah, thank you for watching to the end. If you're still watching, like and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. And yeah, thanks for listening to the story. I enjoyed reading it, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So alright, anyways, until next time, see you later.